Well, good morning, Southern Oregon, and welcome back to the Real Estate Show. So glad you could join us again today. We have a great show in front of you for your listening enjoyment. We have Ben Kline from Cetera Advisor Networks. He's a certified financial planner and going to talk to us about how wealth building, real estate, and financial planning all go hand in hand. So Ben Kline from Cetera Advisor Networks is going to be on the show today, along with Mr. Guy Giles of Mutual Mortgage. So we welcome both Guy and Ben to the studio here in a minute. Let's check our local statistics real quick, like we do. We follow every week the Jackson County, Josephine County, and Klamath County numbers for housing, just so we can track week to week what's happening here in Southern Oregon. So Jackson County prices year over year this week in the residential markets were neutral. The average residential home in Jackson County now costing $462,714 this week. The number of sold year over year in Jackson County were down 11%. There were only 40 closings in the residential market in Jackson County this week on SOMLS. The number of listings year over year in Jackson County were up 8%. That's another increase. There were 647 active listings in Jackson County on SOMLS residential this week. Josephine County prices year over year were down 10% this week. The average residential home in Josephine County costing $423,171. The number of sold year over year in Josephine County were up 38% this week. There were 18 closings on SOMLS in Josephine County's residential markets. The number of listings year over year in Josephine County were up 10% this week. The residential market on SOMLS in Josephine County this week had 316 active listings. Klamath County prices were up year over year 44% this week. The average residential home in Klamath County now costing $357,490. The number of sold year over year in Klamath County this week were up 25%. There were 10 closings on SOMLS in Klamath County's residential market this week. The number of listings year over year in Klamath County were up 34%. There were 284 active listings on Klamath County's residential SOMLS. So you can see, folks, we've got some stabilization happening in all three of our counties. Springtime is upon us. I know it's wildly cold right now, but look for a really great market this spring. So get a hold of your local realtor and get your house on the market. Brush off that pre-approval if you're a buyer and get out there and start making some deals. We're hoping that the interest rates will either stay the same or go down. Wouldn't that be lovely? But either way, we're looking forward to a more normal buying and selling season in Southern Oregon this year. So now that we're got Ben Kline and Guy Giles in the studio, let's get started with today's interview. Ben Kline and Guy Giles. Well, welcome, gentlemen. We're so glad you could join us today.
Well, hey, we're glad to be here.
Same here. It's a fantastic opportunity. Thank you very much for hosting me.
So, Ben, let's start with you. You're with Cetera Advisor Network. You're a certified financial planner. And we'd love to hear a little bit about you and how long you've been doing financial planning.
Thank you very much, Alice. Yeah, so I grew up here in the Valley. After graduating from St. Mary's, I went on to attend graduate commission from the United States Military Academy at West Point. I served as a field artillery officer, primarily in the 82nd Airborne as a paratrooper. And it's funny, it seems like most of my peers follow the 10-year boomerang plan, and I was no exception to that. So I returned right around the middle of the pandemic to start my I'll call it my second career as a financial planner.
Wow, that's great. Well, thank you so much for your service. That's awesome.
I appreciate that.
Well,
And so what does financial planning, how does financial planning incorporate home buying, and what part of ownership of real estate and investing in real estate can play a part in the overall financial planning?
Well, so real quick before we dive into questions, I do have to give a quick nod to compliance. So I am affiliated with Cetera Advisor Networks LLC, which is a member of FINRA, SIPC, and a broker dealer and registered investment advisor. Also, please note that today's discussion will be kind of purely educational and general in nature. Neither Cetera Advisor Networks nor I provide tax, legal advice. And, it's really important to note that everyone's situation is different. And so please don't act on anything that we've discussed today without speaking to your own attorney, tax professional, or financial advisor.
Oh, 100%. Yeah,
Yeah.
purely educational.
So coming back to your question, I think that getting it right with buying a home, whether it's your first home, an upgrade, potentially a downsizing later in life, is really important because for most people, their home can be their largest asset, and could also be a source of some of the largest costs in their life. I mean, anecdotally, I have a well. If my well goes out, that could be a $20,000 unexpected bill. And so it's really important that when one evaluates not just their purchasing power for lifestyle, but the implications involving the specific home they want to buy relative to their life cycle.
Well, and the wealth building parts of real estate ownership are widely known, but I
Yes.
don't think people understand the overall wealth building strategy, how it dovetails with financial planning. I think that would come as a surprise for a lot of people.
Oh, you mean in terms of trying to identify real estate either as a primary home or as a rental, and trying to pursue a desirable piece of equity potentially that could appreciate over somewhere else? Yeah, certainly.
Yeah, as part of a much grander plan for your life.
Yeah, I mean, there are people in my seat that I don't think are as gung ho on real estate as an asset class, partly because, well, we don't dabble in it. I work with securities, but I think that if done appropriately and right and with deliberate intention, yeah, real estate can be a fantastic tool for building wealth. Doesn't mean it doesn't come with risks, but I am in favor. And I'll put it to you that way.
Well, and I'm definitely in favor of having a master plan for your life and your wealth building. We don't want to be accidental about that, for sure.
Yeah.
So how did you come to Cetera Advisors? It sounds like a fabulous company.
Yeah, so I think a lot of people in my seat that go independent, which I recently made a transition to Stereo Advisor Networks, which is one of the larger independent broker dealers out there. I think that I really desired the ability to chart my own course and run my book in a way that I thought was in my client's best interest. And fortunately, the gentleman that I've partnered with, I've known for about 20 years. It's funny, his daughter and I were buying books in 7th grade at the same time.
Oh my gosh.
Conversation. Yeah, it's 20 years later. And when I started out in the industry, I reached out to him because I found out that this individual, which I didn't know before, was involved in doing what I do. And I basically sought out some good wisdom and guidance. And that has evolved into a really cool teaming that we're doing. And I'm really excited to see where we're going to take our practices.
Oh, that is very, very exciting. So can you talk a little bit about the company, Cetera? what can you tell us about that just as an entity?
Well, so as an entity, Cetera is one of the faster growing independent broker dealers. There are a lot out there. And what I really appreciate about them is that they have a both accessible and thorough compliance system, because let's just face it, this is a really regulated industry. And having a larger firm with policies in place and support systems that can ensure that I'm painting within all of the regulatory lines, but also not suffocating, where I can market the way I want. I can do financial planning that I think is in my client's best interest. So that's their independent channel. They have multiple others. I know they have an institutional channel that last I checked, I think Road Credit Union uses their part of their system for their investment advisory. But I do kind of want to steer away, generally speaking, from talking about potential competition in that regard. So yeah, it's been a really wonderful experience.
Wow. Well, it sounds like a great company. So we only have a few seconds left. We're speaking with Ben Kline from Cetera Advisors and also Guy Giles from Mutual Mortgage. We are going to have to take a quick break here in a second, but we will be back with more Ben Kline and Guy Giles. Also wanted to remind you, we're thankfully brought to you by John L. Scott, Ashland and Medford, the Rogue Valley Association of Realtors, and Guy Giles of Mutual Mortgage. They make it possible to bring you the real estate show every week for your education, and so that you can be smart consumers, which that's what everybody wants to be. So don't touch that dial. We'll be right back after a quick word. Well, hey, Southern Oregon, welcome back to the Real Estate Show. So glad you could join us today. We're talking to Ben Kline of Cetera Advisor Networks. He's a certified financial planner, and also Guy Giles of Mutual Mortgage. Thanks for being on the show today, gentlemen.
Well, thank you.
Good morning.
It's good to be back. There's a lot going on for sure.
Yeah, and what a week we've had with all the weather. Oh my gosh.
I know. I live for this kind of stuff. My Jeep just gets happy and likes to go exploring when it's like this. So I probably a few more miles than anybody else.
Well, I understand, Ben, you had to walk to work to be on the show today. Is that right?
I ended up, it's the fortunate beauty of living only a couple of miles away. And you know what? I could use the exercise. So it was nice. But anywhere above 1,700 feet, we had, I think, 14 to 16 inches.
Wow. That's crazy. Well, and it's why we love Southern Oregon, and Southern Oregon is a great place to live and to invest in real estate. But Guy Giles, what a crazy week on the markets. Can you bring us up to speed a little bit on what happened this week?
Yeah, it's hard to even, I mean, I'm sure Ben's in the same boat, just trying to comprehend all the changes and everything that's going on right now. One of the big things for us is this CFPB that kind of controls what a lot of what we do in mortgages. It's funny because some people are thinking that it'll go away. Some people are thinking it might just go under another umbrella. A lot of what they do, I actually made a list the other day, and it's crazy because we're already kind of governed or overseen by the state attorney general, the attorney general, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, HUD, FHFA, the OCC, the FDIC, the Treasury, lawsuits from the public, the Department of Justice.
Wow.
We got a lot of stuff, coming at us all the time. I know he's super highly regulated, and we are too, from a lot of different places. So I have some mixed emotions about what's going on. I never want to go back to some crazy lending like happened before. It's not fair to the average person for that to happen. That said, having a watchdog group that is maybe gone a little too far in some instances, maybe have them reel it in just a little bit, because it makes everything more expensive for people. And is all it does is it costs us more money to produce a loan if we're getting, we've never been sued, and just a lot of this regulation just costs more, and then it's all passed down to the home buyer, and they're the ones that I sit across the desk from every week. Not across the desk as much as I used to. It's a lot of over the phone and different things like that. And there was some great stuff that came out of Frank Dodd. I never want to go back to where you don't have your disclosures 3 days before you get to the signing table.
Yeah.
That was terrible. I don't ever want you to be able to call, your favorite appraiser and say, I need you to appraise this house, and we'll go over the value, when we're at my lake house this weekend. I think that there was some things that had to be done, to get it fixed. So I'll let the CFPB, happen however it's going to happen as far as that goes. But I had no idea until I really started researching it how much regulatory, just everybody's got their hands in lending at this point. And we did lose Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac to the government when, after the financial crash. So I don't know if there's going to be any plans to kind of give them back to the private sector a little bit. There's always been a relationship. They called them GSEs, or government sponsored entities, with Fannie and Freddie. So they could never run completely wild, but they had some programs that were really buttoned up against what the FHA was doing. So it's almost caused some good competition between the FHA and kind of the traditional housing. And whenever there's a little bit of competition, it usually gets better for the buyers. And that's what I'm really hoping after all this stuff. I'm not a guy that ever sold option arms. I didn't even sell these 3-2-1 buy downs over the last few years. And now there's a whole lot of people that are stuck in an 8% rate because they did do those. And so I'm not a loose lender guy at all, but we'll have to just see how the CFPB thing shakes out. They have a new director now, and there's a lot of changes going on. Overall, the mortgage-backed securities are just getting a little bit better every week. It's not going to be a straight ride, to the 10-year treasury going down to 3 or something, but it is, at least the trajectory seems to be the right way for home loan rates. Reconciling some numbers from last year on the jobs, yesterday, Friday, everything I think is just going to help us a little bit. And whatever we can do to make it a little bit more affordable for people to get into a house. I think it's probably the most unaffordable it's been in record. The last time that it was even close was 1981. And
Really?
and yes, yeah. And there's these cycles, and this cycle should show that it was 81 and the next one was 2009. Obviously that one was really artificially, created. And then we have, where we are right now, where housing prices are just up. We had low rates so low for so long that everybody was bidding up on houses. They were just uncontrollably going up in value. And now everybody's paying more for that exact same house. So there should be some sort of a correction. Different schools of thought. I really don't see house prices going down. But that said, historically, every time something like this has happened, they have gone down a little bit. So you're probably seeing some price reductions now, and probably have been seeing a few for a while. But as these rates kind of come back around, we're going to see a resurgence with the buyers, and hopefully it gets a chance to correct a little bit, so just so the regular consumer can get into a house. But
Well, that's really an interesting idea, Guy. Ben, what are your thoughts about a market correction? And I know financial planning often deals more with the stock market, securities branch of things than real estate. But what's your opinion just of the market, the financial markets in general?
Well, what I'll leave you with this is that I don't have a crystal ball. And when I work with clients to develop their portfolios, I will construct portfolios typically based off of the timeline before those funds are needed so that they can potentially withstand corrections. Because here's the thing, we're not clairvoyant.
Or you just plan for it, is what you recommend.
I try to do my best to bake that eventuality into their plan. Which is why typically you'll see financial advisors. Now, this is really general, but you'll typically see risk slowly reduced as a function of time. So as one is approaching retirement or as they progress through retirement, continuing to decrease the amount of risk in that portfolio. But it's really relative. It depends on if that individual is taking distributions from their portfolio, which can also impact the allocation. So, I'm not going to speak to that in terms of whether or not a correction is coming. I think that it's a reasonable concern given the continued double-digit performance that has been seen in certain asset classes over the last few years, especially through the pandemic, that, oh my God, this has been incredible performance for some people and some portfolios. But, this is, given the uncertainty that I think you all are feeling, and I think that I am also feeling, this is why I just stress diversification. And that's really the only, in my opinion, guiding light that you can use to try to buffer.
And where do you think real estate assets hold a spot in people's overall investment strategy? Do they have like just the primary residence? Is it individual? How do you make recommendations?
I think for a lot of people, that first leap into the rental is probably the biggest barrier. But for someone who's motivated, and especially someone who's young, for example, I had a conversation with an individual whose kiddo in their early 20s, making over a couple $100,000 a year, working for one of the major tech firms, and no kids, no dependents, in an area that has had pretty good real estate performance, relatively speaking. I think that in that case, trying to get your foot in the door through a duplex, triplex, whatever it may be, and start the multifamily ball rolling. I really am enamored when I come across clients who in their later years maybe own an apartment complex or a multifamily, multi-unit type setup. I love seeing that. But that does not mean it doesn't come with risks. Tell that to someone who had one of those in talent or is trying to manage that from a distance, and you might come across a different story. But if there's a will and it's reasonable and feasible, and it makes sense relative to all of that other person's financial goals, then I can support that.
Well, and we're going to talk more. That's very, very interesting commentary from Ben Kline, Cetera Advisor Network. He's a certified financial planner, and we've got Giles in the house today from Mutual Mortgage. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Well, welcome back to the Real Estate Show, folks. I'm Alice Lema. I'm a broker here in beautiful Southern Oregon with John L. Scott Real Estate. And we have a repeat of this show tomorrow on Sunday, so that you can catch everything that Ben Kline and Giles said, because we've got a lot of information coming your way, a lot of technical financial stuff. So feel free to listen to the repeat tomorrow at 8 a.m. on this same station. Welcome back, gentlemen. What an interesting conversation we're having.
Thank you very much for having me.
So Ben, before we had to go to break, we were talking a little bit about risk and how some people use real estate for their including in their financial planning. And you think that's a great idea, especially if it can evolve into larger multifamily. I
think that, and I will say, it's not for everyone, because, if you include renters, then there are other costs. So one needs to be able to have other assets set aside to cover their bases. And that kind of goes back into the importance of financial planning. If an individual has the liquidity to, afford a rental, afford the additional risks that can come with that, then I think that could be it could work out as a wonderful addition to a portfolio. But once again, and coming from my time in the military, there's that saying, if Charlie gets a vote. And so you have to make sure that A, you have appropriate renters, and B, there's other risks. There's some political risk. I personally would not like to be a landlord in Portland, for example.
Well, just in Oregon in general, it's different than the rest of the US.
Well, That's
So,
actually why you need a good financial person like Ben, because you do want to be ready when you know, when you have a rental. I think it was probably July that my renter stopped paying rent, and now it's February. By the time I got my place, Humpty Dumpty put back together, I think I have some people signing a lease this week. And the funniest part is they couldn't get into town because of the snow. My house is up on the hill, kind of by, in the same general area where Ben lives, and now I'm freaked out that they're going to go up there and just be like, we're never going to be able to get home in the wintertime, even though this is so rare to have snow like this. So I might be another month trying to rent my place now. I don't know how many tens of thousands of dollars I'm out just because of just one bad renter. So financially you want to be prepared for this, to be able to do it, and that's where he really comes in to advise you on when's the right time to enter also.
yeah, and I think that it's important to look at your asset classes, whether it be equities in the market, certain fixed income instruments, real estate. Uh, I know some people are precious metal only type folks. To look at all of these as multiple smaller pieces of a puzzle. If I see someone, for example, who their entire assets were single family residences and I don't want to pick on the travesty that happened in 2019, but let's say your entire income stream, aside from Social Security, was coming from single family residences in the town of Phoenix. That's a lot of geographical risk. And so I recommend having diversification, not just within if somebody is real estate focused, but across the asset class as well. And that also includes retirement accounts, obviously, which is going to be my bread and butter. Um, but I think that if you can do it and it nests within your overall plan, yeah, I usually can get behind adding real estate to a portfolio.
Well, and you touched on the idea of financial investing evolution. So
Mhm.
over time, there's some asset classes that are more appropriate than others. So would real estate, how would real estate fit in an older person's um, portfolio versus a younger person, as far as risk goes, just in general?
Could you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Well, we were talking about Guy Giles' experience recently, and that's many, many months of not having income.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
I'm just like, how susceptible are older people to the risks of being landlords?
Well, I would argue even more so, considering that especially if somebody's in, I like to segment retirement through you have your go-go years and your early 60s, mid to late 60s, early 70s, then your
Go-go years.
go-go years, right? Then your slower go, and then the no-go years where really you're more
Oh,
homebound.
go-go and no-go. That's great.
Yeah, go-go, slow go, no-go. And so when you're in the slow go to no-go phase of your life, where going back to work potentially, if something were to happen, is kind of out of the question, then yeah, I would argue that there's heightened risk in that. Something that I have also seen and encountered within my own practice is people not planning for accessibility later in life. Um,
You mean like physical?
Physical accessibility, yeah, absolutely.
Wheelchair, like wheelchair walker, that kind of thing?
Yeah, multi-story home in a difficult to navigate. Like you encounter this, I've encountered this at least in Ashland quite a few times, where really cute, charming home on a hill.
Yeah, lots of
Great.
stairs.
Yeah, lots of stairs, lots of slip risk, but hey, it's been my home for 30, 40 years, and
Hmm.
coincidentally maybe had incredible appreciation at this point compared to what they bought it for.
Oh, for sure.
But finding yourself in your, and I've encountered this, finding yourself in your 80s, early 80s, and realizing that you are effectively house poor, where most of your equity at this point could be in your home, and it's inaccessible. And listen, I've got precious junk too, and I'm in my 30s, right? So compound that by a few more decades, and it can be really rough for an individual and their family to have to go through trimming that much later in life, especially if it becomes a necessity to downsize and maybe relocate closer to healthcare. So,
Well, and if your mobility is jeopardized,
yes.
then it's absolutely not appropriate.
Absolutely not. And so this is when I talk about lifestyle versus life cycle, when home buyers are thinking of downsizing or changing things up, the kids empty the nest, they're nearing retirement. I think that that's a factor that really should be brought into the equation. And as a plug, I have also seen some clients when they do this look into potentially either buying a piece of property with an ADU or maybe a renovated basement that's not technically an apartment by code, but could suffice as housing for an in-home caregiver. So these are variables that I would encourage anyone who is in their early years of retirement to start thinking about before it becomes too difficult to downsize.
And that's why it's helpful to have a really smart financial person to talk to
Thank you.
along the way, so you don't wait to the last minute. So, so Guy, from the lender standpoint, the idea of having an ADU or an physical place for an in-home caregiver, how does that work on the lending side?
So, well, it all comes down to qualification. I mean, there are some loans you can get. I apologize. Somebody kind of walked in and got my attention just for a second.
Well, you didn't know we were going to ask this question. In all fairness.
So basically, you're asking the relation with an in-house caregiver. I mean, are you talking about like from qualification purposes?
Just like how, what are the loan choices for families that are looking for a multi-generational setup or something?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's pretty easy these days to co-sign or co-borrow for somebody, whether you're occupying the house or not. We do have a lot of people that brother and sister want to help, but they're not necessarily going to be the ones that are going to be taking care of somebody. So we'll have them, instead of physically being there to help the person, financially do it. So, being maybe a non-owner occupying co-borrower or a co-signer, just depending on the loan program. As far as well, it's just very specific as far as that goes. But we do see a lot of different avenues where people are still able to get into a house. The one thing that we've seen a little bit recently are ADUs in the country, and they're not legal.
Yeah, that's a new thing.
Yeah, well, and they're not legal, so it does run into a problem. You're decommissioning these things. I will never understand why you can have 5 people on 1/4 acre in town, but you can have 12 acres and only one house on it. I mean, to an extent, I can understand it, but it's hard to explain to people. So just depending on kind of the structure, but there are a lot of people that are looking to take care of their families when they're a little bit older, and maybe it's grandma's Social Security that kind of puts them over the top, being able to buy a house, and they have somebody there to help take care of them.
Especially in a high interest rate environment, you need a couple more dollars in your pocket, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And I'm sorry to cut you off. We've got to go to commercial real quick. Thank you, Ben Kline and Guy Giles, for being on the show today. We're going to take a quick commercial break, and we'll be right back with more of the Real Estate Show. Do not touch that dial. Well, hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Real Estate Show. So glad you could join us today. We're talking to Ben Kline of Cetera Advisor Networks. He's a certified financial planner, and Guy Giles of Mutual Mortgage. Thanks so much again for being on the show, you guys.
Hey, thanks.
Back.
So Ben, during the break, we were talking a little bit about what it's like to evaluate a person's financials, especially when they're looking at buying a home. So you want to touch on that for a little bit?
Yeah, I think, I'm going to keep beating on the drum that when looking at how much I can take on in debt to buy a home, it needs to be relative to all of the other goals of an individual or couple's life. So kind of drawing from a metaphor, since this is a outdoor community, in whitewater river rafting, if you see an obstacle, what you do is you point at it and you push away, right? And that's similar to how I evaluate the risk of buying too much home. Um, Typically, what we use are the housing ratios 1 and 2. And I'm going to explain what that is. So the first one, housing ratio 1, is all of the costs associated with the experience of living in that home under a mortgage. Your principal, your interest, taxes, inflation, and maybe HOA fees. In an ideal state, we're looking for that to be under 28% of someone's gross income. So for
28%.
28%, yeah. So if a couple is pulling in 100 grand combined, then you really shouldn't go over $28,000 a year in paying for that home. Now, when we include all of the other debts, this is the broad housing ratio number 2. That's going to be student loans, which for my millennial peers, I see you. I recognize where you guys are at. Couple in an auto loan. I don't know if anyone's been in the market for a car recently, but cars are really expensive right now. So combines, student loans, auto loans, any kind of revolving debt that you might have. And ideally that combined with a home in total debt servicing, you really want to try and keep that under 36% of a budget. Granted, that is general. Different situations can dictate higher or lower risk tolerance, but that's ideal. And the reason why these are important is that it's about freeing up enough capital to fund other goals / necessities in life. So having enough liquid capital to fund an emergency fund. I'm sure we've all heard the mantra of 3 to 6 months. Being able to adequately save for retirement. For somebody who's in their 20s and 30s, that should be roughly, I mean, this is general, but 10 to 13% of your salary should be going towards saving for the future.
Really?
Yeah, yeah. And now that doesn't that's inclusive of your employer. So if you work for a company that does a 5% match, then just
Gotcha.
buy that. But
Yeah.
generally speaking, that's where someone at that age should be. Conversely, 35 to 45, anywhere from 13 to 20%. And that's to be able to maintain. The goal is that in retirement, we're maintaining our quality of life, not reducing significantly. Granted, expenses are probably going to reduce as a result of not having to pay for as much gas because you're not commuting, or nice business clothes, whatever it may be. But so we've got our short-term goals, our long-term goals. Hopefully, being able to fund a college fund if you have kids. I cannot stress enough that it is so detrimental to start life in debt through college funds. And as a military guy, obviously I'll I'll toot my horn regarding the GI Bill and its wonderful benefits for getting college paid for free.
Oh, totally agreed. Yeah, I think all 3 of us agree. We're
And-
down for the VA
yeah,
benefits.
yeah, it's remarkable, and I wish more people took advantage of it. But it's when you put it all in perspective that you have to be able to keep the entire ship afloat relative to just having one asset class that you're building equity in. And building equity is a good thing, I would argue, but it needs to be enough home where you can allocate elsewhere, but not too much.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it's interesting that in the beginning of the show, you mentioned that over time, the stage of life you're in does influence your choices for financial planning, what you can do and not do. But as you were speaking about the millennials, it crossed my mind that there's been a lot of financial trauma on the Gen Xers.
Yes.
And they're uniquely vulnerable because they're sandwiching between caring for elders and caring for young adults, not caring, but helping. And that's perfectly normal, but the Gen X and the baby boomers that are kind of close to the Gen X generationally have taken a lot of financial hits over the last few decades. So how would you help somebody like that get back on track? Because time would be of the essence, I would think.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm just going to tell you my process really, really bluntly. So in the military, every month we would do what's known as a layout of sensitive equipment, and it's the same idea here.
Is
We,
that right?
yeah, we take you put everything on the table. What are we working with? What do you want to accomplish? And we identify threats through that, and we also identify goals. There's nothing I enjoy more than sussing out with a client some dream that they've kind of backburnered and never really thought they'd be able
Oh,
to.
that's awesome.
Oh yeah, like I could think of one person where we're gonna start sailing lessons, or at least I'm prodding them in that direction. So that's really fun. But yeah, you take inventory, you determine, where the choke points are and where the threats are specific to their plan, and you go from there. For the difference between generations, it's kind of a roll of the dice. It depends on, your parents' need for care. Long-term care it can be incredibly expensive. And so when I think about the transfer of wealth and the great transfer of wealth that's currently undergoing between the boomer generations and later generations, um, it really depends on if those individuals are going to need long-term care and how that's going to get funded. So I think it's harder to make a generational statement when there is that unknown that is so hard to predict.
Mm-hmm.
For anybody that's just on the radio and can't see the YouTube, if you saw Ben's face just then when he was talking about letting that person achieve their dream of sailing, that's the guy you want to work with because honestly, you can just genuinely tell that he cares about doing the right thing and getting people to those goals.
Well, Guy, that's a wonderful compliment. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. Philosophically, every single one of us only have so few shots in our revolver, and it's not you got to make it count. And I really, it's cool to see somebody's light turn on. I really do get a lot of passion and pleasure out of that.
Well, and it's a joy to help people get from where they are to where they want to be in the
Yeah.
financial world because it's not always easy. And planning is super important. So when you're dealing with, well, let me ask you, what's like the average age of your clients, Ben?
All
They-
over.
All
Yeah,
over?
all over. I have some folks in their 20s all the way through to their 80s. Because financial planning is an iterative process that once again it's about life cycle. So I would argue that there is kind of a standard deviation, a normal curve to it, where people who are maybe 10, 15 years out, 40s, maybe they finally realize they need to get serious about the
That's
plan. Because
super common, huh?
well, the joy of your 20s, I'm not going to ever get old, those people are far and few between. And typically the clients that I have had who are in their 20s were pretty motivated. And I could tell we're going to go on to do great things because they were getting their ducks in a row early. Um, and so, yeah, I mean, it's a spectrum like anywhere else, but I would argue there's probably a normal curve to it.
Well, that's pretty exciting to hear that we've got some youngers thinking that far ahead.
Yeah. Yeah. For me in my practice, I really like to focus on as my niche, younger business owners, especially kids who are either taking over their parents' business or starting their
Do
own.
you find a lot of younger business owners?
I do, I really do, and that's really motivating because I feel like I can provide the most value to those kind of people. I mean, as a business owner myself, I empathize, and I some of the strategies that I can employ in my own world I can directly apply to my clients and vice versa. I mean that's the privilege of this seat is that
Mm-hmm.
I can look across all of my clients through what I talk to them about and what they tell me, and I can pluck good ideas and kind of apply those in future scenarios that I encounter because every day is different.
Yeah, well, it's very impressive to hear what you have to say, Ben.
Thank
We're
you.
so thrilled to have you on. I'd love to have you on again.
I appreciate that. That would be wonderful. I'd love to be back on.
Ben Kline, Cetera Advisor Network, certified financial planner. In the couple of seconds we have left, how do people get a hold of you?
Yeah, so you can email me at KlineB, KLINEB at soteranetworks.com. Or you can call my phone at 541-227-6454.
That's all we have, folks. Have a beautiful weekend.
Thank you very much.